This is when you've already been alerted of the crisis, all right? You get a phone call, whatever the case may be, you've been alerted because your pre-crisis preparation plan has kicked in. You've been alerted of the crisis. Number one, obviously, containment. You have to control the situation. But in controlling the situation, it is not about denying that it took place. It is about mobilizing your team, finding out exactly what is this crisis situation, strategizing on your approach. But again, in your pre-crisis mode, hopefully this was one of the many issues that you have identified, all right? The other thing is when I put here firewall the crisis containment team, now this is interesting. Have you thought that the crisis containment team needs to be firewalled with the business operations team? Because if you still intend to continue with your operations, the crisis team needs to be buffered from what's going on in business, and they should not be influenced by your business decisions in that sense, all right? The other one is obviously at this early stage, you need to reach out to your internal and external contacts. Again, you have to kick into gear your crisis communication channels. How are you communicating with your internal stakeholders? How and when are you going to be communicating with your external stakeholders? And then, of course, your identification of your spokesperson. Just remember one thing, the CEO does not necessarily have to be the chief delivery officer. The CEO might be required depending on the crisis, but your spokesperson and your crisis communication team need to make that decision. And of course, if it's a situation that took place on site, you need to dispatch the relevant person. So again, these are the first steps, your containment. The second part, which is not a next step, it could be a concurrent, and this would be a concurrent action. When you're gathering your facts, and you need to also get that facts collated by one reliable person. You might say that I've got loads of facts. Yes, of course. You may have teams on the ground, you have made teams online, everyone needs to be collating, you have all teams, but they need to report into that one person, that one team that is collating all that information that would then pass it to the CEO or the relevant person who will help answer and contain that situation. But you must realize, because also part of your training, that the information is fluid. What you think might be, it's like as long as everyone has been trained and they know that there's no such thing as an absolute truth until it is verified, checked and verified. And in a crisis situation, there is very little luxury of time. So that information is fluid and the situation is fluid. But because of the fluidity of that, do not speculate. And it's also, like I said, that's not the time for you to put up your hand and say, I totally accept responsibility. I'm very sorry about what happened, okay? No quick fixes until you get the facts. But again, as we go to the next step, do not say no comment to the media. When you've established your crisis central command, whether it's a physical or a virtual space, you need to ensure that everyone knows, because it's part of your pre-crisis and issues management, you need to know where you're supposed to go. Again, in this COVID world, we know that a physical location is not possible, but have you as a crisis management team done sufficient virtual workspace? Have you hooked up all that is necessary? Have you established a platform for the communication? The worst thing that could ever happen is when all of you are congregating onto that platform, it crashes. Why? So sorry, boss, we only paid for 30 people, but now we've got 50 people. So those are things that need to be factored in pre-crisis. This is the communication. Again, even though it's point number 4, this is action 4. It is not, now I do this. At the same time, even when information is fluid, you need to communicate with your stakeholders and the members of the publics that are being infected by the crisis. It cannot be underscored that silence and delayed responses, that's the worst thing. But when you give assurances, please ensure that while you're exhibiting your human nature and you empathize, Make sure you also have established proper communication channels so that your employees, the media, and the people who are affected know where they can turn to for the correct source of information. That they're not turning to, my friend and her team members are part of the crisis management team, so I think we should listen to her. No, there is an established protocol of where information is going to be updated and where everyone who's affected by that crisis can turn to. The other one is that when we say communicate values, it's not like stand up there and say that we as a company respect humans and want to make sure that this tragedy never happens again. That's basic. That is really talking down to consumers. It's like telling you that it's important for you to walk and breathe at the same time. If your company is not concerned about trying to recover and respecting and being empathetic towards the loss of life, then so what you say and how you communicate is very important. Don't shove it in a person's face that, we as a company are also very affected by this, obviously, okay? So language, tone of voice, and who communicates. Consider those aspects. In handling the media, when it comes to the media, that one actually is more, the media will ask you questions and you know what their point is. They want to get to the bottom of something. They want to be able to address the readers and give the readers something to read. And then again, know who are and what the different tones of voice come from with regards to the various press. International media have a certain agenda. Local media have a certain duty and agenda also. So you need to know what their mission is. You have to mobilize your media relations. That's not the time for you to ask your teammate or your corporate comms, who do I call? Who's calling? I think I had a question from Mothership. I think today asked me a question. Who's the editor? You need to have all that protocol in place already. Then social media listening. I am in no position to come and tell you what is the obvious thing, because we are all on Facebooks, and whether you like Facebook or you dislike it, you're also on Twitter, you also have your YouTube videos. Every form of social media listening is taking place, and that's something that you need to consider actually as a company. Are your employees posting stuff out? What is being said by members of the public about your company and about the situation? Next one is about communication. If it involves victims and casualties, you need to really give full information, but please remember, your media statement can go out first so that it gives you some time to address it face-to-face in a full press conference. But when you start talking, that first soundbite, that is going to be, research has shown us, that first soundbite, chances are it's going to be the only soundbite that people hear. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That's one of the basics of communication during a crisis. If we look at where social media communication can take place, this is the chatter. Review what's going on in your own website. Find out your own intranet channels. What is going on the social media channels? All of these are part of the monitoring that you might want to definitely take into consideration. When we're looking at step 6, again, this is action point 6. You communicate directly with your affected constituencies, your internal publics. Are you communicating even with your receptionist right up to your C-suite? And are you communicating with and getting your team leads to communicate with the people internally so that everybody understands what's going on? The external publics are your communications teams and the people that need to be in contact with the external public, the external stakeholders, the shareholders, your suppliers, your landlord. Who is communicating with them and how is that communication taking place? As a communications team, as the crisis communications team, you should also determine what are we trying to achieve with this form of communication? Is it just to appease people with that information at this point in time? Is it to give them some form of actionable points? What is that communication objective? Why are you communicating with them at that point in time? Okay. Next one is, of course, when you get the results, monitor and evaluate the results of communication. We also look at business, continue business operations. Should the business carry on? If yes, then how are you going to buffer those who are is part of that team, working on their day jobs and also being part of the crisis communications team. How can the business operations go on? You need to find people, think about it. You're part of the crisis communication team and you're handling that crisis. But there's also projects and campaigns and stuff that basic business operations requires you to take care of. As part of the pre-crisis management, you and the team members need to think of who's your second in command that should be taking care of all of the day-to-day operations. And that's what we mean by firewall. And so that you can concentrate on the crisis communication management part of it. And the last part also is recover. You must consider contingency plans. Once the crisis has passed, how are you going to recover? How can you do better? Right? These are just part of the crisis recovery, which is this really part about, an analysis that you take place internally. Were you really in control of that crisis? Were you focused on, was it public opinion? Has it shifted from how you feel about a certain issue? These are all factors that come into play with crisis recovery.